p.m. and I turned on the recording. I think the last time you were here, I messed up briefly and didn't have that for a couple minutes. So I got it right this time. Thank you, everybody, and welcome. So I note that all members are present, as well as our guest, Greg Walwer, Director of Archaeological Consulting Services of Guilford, Connecticut. And Dr. Walwer, this being a professional setting, I think it's appropriate that I call you Dr. Walwer, unless you want to be called Greg.
Greg's great, thank you.
All right. Greg Walwer is here. He is the head of the firm that conducted the archaeological survey in the St. Mark's Triangle in the fall of 2022. The report that was prepared for St. Mark's and was sent to the Mass Historical Commission, and that we also got, of course, is dated October 2022, signed off on by the Mass Historical Commission and Ed Bell, the state archaeologist. And I just want to say that, I noted the other day that we have just gone past the 1-year mark of what has been rather an odyssey. That it was on 7 February of 2022 that we sent from the Historical Commission our letter to St. Mark's, requesting that they take a good hard look at, the possibility of engaging an archaeologist to survey this site with an eye toward our concern about possible Native American burials. It's been, again, a long haul and a very good partnership, I must say, between the Historical Commission and St. Mark's, and Greg has been a big part of it. And, the school decided after deliberation to engage Dr. Walwer and to move forward on the dig. And there was a lot of prep work that Greg had to do, reports, planning, to satisfy and gain the permission of the Mass Historical Commission to move forward. That being acquired, it was around Labor Day that Greg was on site for several days before, just before and after Labor Day, collecting information, digging test pits, doing, a very thorough survey of the area. Took a month or so to write up a report and submit it. And I will say that, we posted Greg's report with previous meeting minutes, and I made sure to post it again with our agenda for this meeting, because I really want people to read this report. It runs to about 50 pages. It is unbelievably, I described it to a friend as eye-wateringly comprehensive and impressive. It surveys the grounds, the artifacts that were found, the reasons behind things, the conditions of the soil, all of it to it fairly well. And anybody that has concerns about the dearth of expertise in this country would be heartened by picking up this report and reading it quite thoroughly, because I have to say, I've been through it twice now, very, very carefully. And it is not just because he's with us tonight, but I have been unbelievably impressed with this report, and have told anybody that cared to listen how I feel about it and how I feel about Greg's work as just a consummate professional. And I think I am 100% satisfied with the report, his conclusions, and his clearance of the area. But I did want to have Greg back just to run us through the way the dig went, what he found, what he didn't find. And I do have some questions that I think would help clarify things for people in the public who may have some lingering questions, or I wouldn't say doubts, but certainly things that they wonder about. Because, ultimately, it must be said, given the documentary evidence and the history of the town and the kind of lore that grows up around an area about Native American habitation, I think there were, folks that thought gee, this is why, of course, we asked about it in the first place, and why the Mass Historical Commission was very much in favor of an investigation of the area, because we all felt that there was a fairly reasonable probability of there being something found. And when there wasn't, I mean, I can understand why people were a little bit puzzled. Why isn't there anything there? Of course, there was stuff there. There was a lot of stuff there, and Greg documents it really to a fairly well. But the question of why weren't Native American remains found is a very interesting one, and Greg's report covers that. But I'd like to hear Greg talk about that, and I think that may be the main point of sort of public concern. But Greg, I want to turn it over to you, and just, without taxing you for a really long explanation, because I think your report speaks for itself. If you would just kind of walk us through what you did, what you found, what you didn't find, and maybe why you think some things were found and some things were not. Is that fair enough?
Sure thing. Thank you. You're hired as our PR guy, so thanks for all the kind words. So we went through a pretty long permitting process to set the project up. Massachusetts requires pretty detailed permit that involves a lot of background research and a definitive layout of what the testing pattern will look like. I don't know if anybody has a copy of the report in front of them, but if you go to page 25 of the report, there's a pretty detailed review of what we did in the field. So the main mission was to document the potential presence of, oh, thank you for the graphic, for the potential presence of Nipmuc burials based on some historic accounts of the fact that the so-called northeast corner of the burial ground was the site of some Nipmuc burials. Of course, that boundary, northeast corner, could have been floating through time. We do know that as of 1727, there was a stone wall built around the perimeter of the burial ground, but that's not to say that they necessarily properly enclosed all of the burials in existence up to that point. We do have a fair idea that that's probably the case now, and I'll run you through why we think that. So in order to prove one way or the other, we did multiple techniques of subsurface investigation besides the background research that indicated the general area could be sensitive for that. If you look at the red squares, and they're not exactly to scale, but they represent half-meter shovel tests that were taken down from the surface to, let's say, almost a meter below the surface where possible, and certainly to depths that would reach what we call a substratum layer of soil, which should correspond to glacial times before the occupation of people in this continent. So, but as you might imagine, those are very small tests, and it's possible that you could miss burial features based on the distance between the tests, which were 5 meters. But between tests, you could easily have burial features in the ground that could be missed by this technique. So the technique wasn't necessarily to potentially uncover burials, but to get an idea of the subsurface conditions of the site. And in so doing, we were able to show that on the eastern tests, for instance, it appeared as if the original top layers of soil, the topsoil and the subsoil, we would call it, above the substratum were probably stripped and then redeposited from some historic landscaping effort, probably related to the Joseph Burnett house that was located, we believe, under what's now the Pollination Garden. And I'll describe how we came to that conclusion as well. And along the northern row of tests that are labeled 2E through 5W, we came across a very substantial foundation feature that is in the approximate location of a structure that appears on an 1870 map, although because of the concrete slab beneath what would have been a brick chimney and other brickwork that we found at the site, we believe postdates that original structure and is probably a replacement structure. For instance, we found an oil tank inside its perimeter. The nature of the concrete at the site, not to mention the artifacts that were associated with it, really suggests that this was probably not the original structure that was at that location. And what the shovel test did allow us to do is to recreate what the general soil conditions were, which subsequently guided us in how we were to strip the top layers of soil and looking for burial features in a more broad fashion. So after the shovel test gave us an idea of the remaining stratigraphy, we brought in a mechanical equipment operator with a flat-bladed bucket, wide 4-foot wide bucket, I believe, to strip in wide swaths the soil down to the substratum or subsoil layers, at least, that would have revealed any burial features in the ground. And those burial features, if you recall from the last time, would typically be from the contact period or earlier, consisting of ovals shaped, darker features in the lighter subsoil and substratum, in which usually flexed burials would take place. It's not until, let's say, late 17th century that the Native American burials of the area start to mimic those of Euro-Americans with a more laid out posture in rectangular feature contexts. So those were the types of features we were looking for. And if you want, now that you have the report on the screen, if you could scroll down to page, well, let's go to page 29 first. These give you an idea of the stratigraphy that we were running into, where quite often we had stripped soil above a original lighter substratum context. And in the very right stratigraphic profile, that's the test closest to the pollination garden, where we found a very deeply buried topsoil. So that dark stuff you see at the bottom of the test is the topsoil that was culturally modified and laid directly above a substratum without an intervening subsoil that should be there. And the fact that it's missing probably relates to the construction of the building that was just to the south beneath the pollination garden. And if you look at the pollination garden today, it's a somewhat raised landform that looks prone to have something beneath it. To the north of these, to that test, we found more highly disturbed tests without an original topsoil and some traces of material that could be related to that original house site. And then if you go down to page 31, these are two of the broad trenches that we're talking about to strip off the topsoil down to either a subsoil or substratum to demonstrate whether or not there were burial feature contexts present. Now on the top one, you can see how the soil there is a very light gray. And that's your original substratum material that would have been beneath a dark topsoil and then a not so dark subsoil. Below that, in figure 15, the eastern trench that was located further to the east, there is the more orangey and yellow subsoil. So that's what's originally directly below your dark topsoil and above the gray substratum. So in the case of the eastern trench there at the bottom, we only had to go down as far as the original subsoil to show that there were no feature contexts. Up above, however, we had to go down to substratum only because the original subsoil had already been stripped historically. So in both cases, nice broad swaths of exposed substrata or subsoils that should have revealed dark oval stains that would represent burial features. Now you might say, well, I see some little bit of dark staining here and there. And typically, like for instance, if you look at figure 15, almost right to left within the trench, halfway to 2/3 way back is a stain that I think we attributed to a root. So sometimes the roots of a tree will grow within the subsoil, and then when it dies off, the organics of it will leave a darker stain. More to the foreground of that, you can see where you have some darker staining surrounding some rocks. And that's a typical function of soil and water that migrates around rocks and leaves organics in the vicinity of rock clusters that are beneath the ground. So in both of those cases, we, after the photograph, we dug beneath those to make sure we were truly in sterile subsoil or substrata. And sure enough, in all of these cases, there were no features below those stains. Then if you look on the next page, figure 16, on what we called the Western Trench, there's where we exposed the foundation feature that we had shown on the map a few minutes ago. And the horizontal scale bar, which is in decimeters, is laying on top of a concrete, a brick foundation, part of the foundation that we believe could have served as a front porch to the feature. And of course, we dug our broad trench around it because the foundation itself would have obliterated any feature context beneath it. So we tried to tuck these trenches as close to the cemetery boundaries as possible, and with our maximum effort to expose any possible grave features that would be outside the formal boundaries of the cemetery as defined today. And then if you look at the next figure 17, that's a shovel test that we dug adjacent to the concrete slab of what we believe is a second structure at that location. And you can see a stone alignment directly behind it. If you look at the next page, figure 18, this is a much broader area that we had exposed. This part of the area was already grubbed out of trees before our project. So unfortunately, we were not able to test this area before that happened. But what we did do was scrape down below the existing grade substantially enough to show a very clean subsoil or substratum beneath it. So again, no darker oval characteristic stains that you'd expect to find with a typical prehistoric burial context. Now, because the Noble history book that shows the sketch graphic of the Nipmuc burials in the northeast corner of the so-called burial ground, actually that graphic seems to show that cluster in the northeast part of this property rather than the northeast corner of the burial ground. And for that reason, we put in an extra trench in the very northern corner of the property where St. Mark's Street meets Marlborough Road. Again, and this is a stratigraphic profile showing the edge of the trench or the wall of the trench. And look at that very huge boulder beneath the signboard, and a fairly disturbed context above that. And then a former asphalt pavement at about 20 centimeters below the existing surface. So that's basically what we ran into in the field. I think what I'd like to do is take you backwards to a map on page 21, which I think is very instructive for supporting our conclusions that there probably are no burials outside the formal boundaries of the cemetery. Again, page 21. And this is a map that dates to 1971. It's not a very precisely drafted map, although it does show the relative distribution of known burials, marked burials on site. And I think there's two areas I'd like to point out. And north, keep in mind, north is up, basically. But in the southwest corner, you see a very high density of burials. Yes. And we know that from a former ground penetrating radar study that there are probably burial contexts to the west of that wall now existing. and at risk, of course, for any future developments or projects that might be in that area. What we also see, which is very striking, is in the northeast corner of this burial ground delineation is a complete lack of marked graves, and that's probably where your Nipmuc burials are. So the historic literature is probably correct that they're pretty much loaded up at the northeast corner of the current cemetery, that the walls probably did encapsulate most or all of them. And if there are burials still there outside the walls, they're probably tucked very tight to the stone wall, and thus why we didn't encounter any. So I think that summarizes what we encountered, what we didn't, why we drew the conclusions that we did, and I'm sure there could be remaining questions. So I would definitely welcome that at this time.
And Greg, so as I understand it, basically, and there's, I think an important point is to say is that there was a lot of question about why, for instance, you were in this area, basically to the east of the old burial ground, and that's library or currently town-owned property. And I think, if I may say, and correct me if I'm wrong here,
Right.
is that is because where the VHB plan showed a pathway.
Correct.
This
We
is
were
just
charged- Yeah, that's right.
right.
We
Right.
charged with the task of not missing anything. It's my worst nightmare in this job, is missing something. And
Right.
it can happen.
Right.
But that's why we try to be extra thorough. There was some question as to ownership of a small stretch of the walkway. It showed up on the plans. It was approved by Massachusetts Historical. I don't think the library was completely privy to this. So we had to have the administrator of our project deal with them to make everything okay. But ultimately, we showed that probably you've got a site under that pollination garden, and you probably are okay to build the walkway and not impact burials. And that, to me, that's the mission, not to quibble about who owns what now, or
Right, right. And that it was a functional, the point that the investigation was a functional one. And for instance, the question of why did you not investigate within the trees, even closer to the stone wall, both to the east and the north? The answer to that is that that ground has not been disturbed, and there is no plan or intention to disturb it. So there's, like, for instance, copse of trees to the north west right here that's been left intact, and you didn't investigate in there because there's no intention to disturb that area. So as I understood your report, there may well be burials either in this area, under the walls, or possibly just outside them.
Absolutely correct. And that, that's a good, it's a good lesson to distinguish us from the academic side of archaeology, because if, in the academic world, the mission might be to locate the burials. And our mission wasn't actually that. Our mission was to make sure that a proposed project would not impact any existing burials. It's two slightly different things, but but could have radically different results in the methodologies and where you test and how you test and so forth. So
right. And so, like, one of the questions going forward for some folks in town who are very, and I respect and admire these folks who are very concerned about, well, where are those burials? And you've just, I think, laid out that there's a decent probability that they're here, where I'm showing with the cursor, inside the walls, or perhaps just outside, where you didn't investigate because that ground has not been disturbed and there's no intention of disturbing it. But the question has also been put to me, and I've just wondered if you're willing to offer an offhand opinion. There's been some speculation, well, maybe the burials from this Nipmuc, habitation is across Marlborough Road on the green of St. Mark's, or possibly over the ball field, which is over here, or up toward Pilgrim Church. In other words, on higher ground. Is that because I think there's some, feeling that people would like to know for sure if, where these burials might be, since you didn't find them. Is there a possibility that it's, let's say, closer to Pilgrim Church, which is roughly over here, or closer to the St. Mark's soccer fields, which are up this way, or across the street, or can't you really tell?
Both, I'd say good possibility, and we can't tell without a lot more testing and analysis, and, we're up for hire. But,
Right.
we're not gunning to find things, so we solve one problem at a time. And right now, the problem was to see if we could get these folks to safely have a project. And it looks like they should be good to go.
And I want to say too that, of course, as you pointed out, you did find something, not least the foundation, or the probable foundation, which is likely beneath the pollinator garden, of what we presume, and I think your report concurs, was likely the home, a Burnett-owned property that may well have been the home of William Washington, which is identified in Nick Noble's book as, a former sexton of St. Mark's, and connected with St. Mark's School. And there's a kind of very interesting history behind him as the first free Black resident of Southborough, him and his family.
That's right.
So that's an interesting story, and one that I think, though burials were not found, I think it's not to say that we didn't, Southborough and St. Mark's and all of us didn't gain a wealth of history from this report, because, of course, you haven't really touched on the fact that you found a ton of artifacts, mostly coal, right, and various shards of pottery, and it's quite extensively cataloged and measured to, what, 1/10 of a gram in the your appendices for the report. Can you say anything at all about the actual artifacts that were found?
Yeah, so I didn't mean to omit, by the way, the Washington connection, which could be very, very significant, but then again, it's not proven to be the case. Didn't want to get too far into speculation, but that is very good of you to note that, which could make that site below the pollination garden very significant. In terms of the materials, you're right that coal was a substantial part of the assemblage. But coals can seem very boring, but you have to keep in mind that coal was a very important fuel for the region after the advent of the railroad, when it could be trucked in, because after all, we don't really have natural formations in the region, and until nuclear energy in the mid 20th century. So you kind of have that 100-year time period from the mid 19th century to the mid 20th century where it's really, really prevalent and found in the contemporaneous site context. So that's how we knew that we were probably dealing with sites that conform with what we think we know from the historic maps, that don't show structures in those areas in the mid 19th century. And it's not until the last third and after the formation of the schools that those structures appear. We can tell you that from the ceramics, they tend to be more institutional or durable forms, such as stonewares and ironstone chinas, and less refined, let's say, porcelains or gold gilts or transfer printed refined ware. So this is probably two structures that had a little bit of an institutional focus, which also makes a lot of sense given the school context. And some bottle glass, which often appears at sites as an invasive migrating type of artifact from broken beverage bottles that are probably half of them post-date the actual occupation of the site. So those were the primary types of artifacts we found. We did have some brick that probably related to the former structures, and not much in the way of personal items. We were limited to, I think, a container fragment of some sort, 2 fragments of a clay pigeon, which probably relates to recreational shooting after the site context, and 1 very oxidized button back from Test 7 South, which is next to the pollination garden. So there's another slight clue that could be the start of your site there. So that's probably the broad range of materials that we found. I'm just going to look through our report real quick to see if I had missed any major category of artifact, and I don't believe so. So,
Greg, while you're doing that, just a curiosity, and it's just more about the methodology. The shovel excavations you did were kind of in an angular pattern, some north-south, and then coming and going off to the, I guess it's the east. What led to that pattern versus more random, diggings throughout the location?
are you talking about the square shovel tests or the trenches?
The shovel tests that were in a kind of a pattern that was angular in form.
Yeah, here we go. So the key was, and that's on page 25 again, the key to that pattern was we wanted 2 arrays of tests as close to the stone wall as possible, but within the project impact area. So that's why we didn't dig those right next to the stone wall. In each of those cases, those were really as close as we could get to the stone wall without veering off of the project impact area.
Mhm.
So you can see that the east-west alignment of tests is really at the southern boundary of the area to be impacted. And the north-south tests are right along the proposed path. Again, if we move those closer to the stone wall, we might have had better odds of hitting bodies, but then we would have been outside the project impact area. So again, an academic would put those tests right along the wall. In our case, we're mission focused on showing whether or not the proposed project would impact any possible burial features.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, great question.
Right, and I would say also, Greg, isn't it generally the recommendation, for instance, of Mass Historical and I think other state historic societies is to, when in doubt, don't touch it. In other words, you wouldn't dig up or disturb the trees that are even closer to the stone wall to engage in that kind of investigation. In other words, it's generally it seems to the preference is to leave it undisturbed, even if it results in the rather frustrating for the layperson kind of conclusion that we can't conclude anything, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'll tell you a short story on how we got burned on time and effort. Is we had friends of a burial ground hire us to submit a research design and excavation because they were concerned that some bodies were being exposed at a burial ground, or could be because of mass erosion in areas that prior studies had already shown through ground penetrating radar likely had burial contexts. So we went through the process of doing a lot of background research, drafting up a big fancy permit. And those permits that we submit are like basically 2/3 of a report. And we were rejected, told that we were not authorized to do our exploratory excavations because no bodies had actually been exposed yet. And we were pulling out our hair like, oh my gosh, guys, don't you realize that, the next hurricane that comes along. And this was a substantial cemetery with Revolutionary War soldiers and so forth. So we were in Massachusetts, that can go to the extreme where, not only do you have to have some justification, but they're going to really put you through the grinder before they have you poke holes in the ground. So right you are.
I'd love to take some, first to see if the commission has any questions for Greg, and because we want to keep you here all night, and then turn to the public if you wouldn't mind, if there are any questions there that we could deal with. Is anyone, Grant, Kate, Annie, Jim, any further questions? Or do you want to go straight to attendees if they have anything?
I do have one question. First, Greg, thanks for coming and presenting your report. I found it really fascinating and very thorough, as Kevin mentioned. I did just want to ask, going back to the discussion of potential Nipmuc burials in the, I believe you said, northeast corner of the old burial ground. I was curious if you had seen the, there's a kind of hand-drawn map of the old burial ground based on ground penetrating radar that was done in 2005 or 2006. by the Historical Commission, I believe. Obviously predated me, but just wanted to see if you had seen that, because I believe it showed unmarked burials throughout the burial ground and even outside the walls, and in a different area from where the proposed project was. But just wanted to see if you had seen that.
Our lead researcher at the time, when we prepared the permit, had reviewed that and had confirmed that that area was to the way to the south and west of us. So I've not seen those graphics myself, but
Okay.
we had reviewed that as part of our firm's research.
Okay, I just found it interesting because I think I have a copy of it somewhere here, but it did show unmarked burials throughout the burial ground, including, I think, it was hard to kind of align it, but I think in the area that you were referencing on page 31. So that's why I just found it interesting.
Kate or Annie, any questions? No. Annie? No. Jim, anything else? Why don't we, if any attendees have a question, please raise your hand. And no, everybody's see, Greg, you've covered it so beautifully. I think that no one has any questions. We have a fairly substantial attendee list. So I did have one other thing I wanted to ask you, and this is more in the way of asking you a certain kind of favors that both myself and Grant are actually on the working group devoted to trying to come up with a design for this area in terms of a park. And one of the things that I sort of floated in the most recent meeting was that it seems to me that there's one possible plan that calls for instance, a walkway with a series of stops and possible historic markers that would note the Native American presence, that would talk about the fact that within sight of this spot, you can see components that were necessary for incorporation as a town, a mustering ground, a graveyard, a meeting house, and so on. And I was very interested both in a stop that might broach the story of William Washington, but also a stop or some kind of marker that would make note of the archaeological investigation that was done on the site, because I think it's really a fascinating kind of story, both in terms of the artifacts that were found, the nature of the soil beneath, someone's feet as they walk this path, and what was there and what wasn't there, and why what wasn't there. In other words, that it's quite likely that those historically noted interments are in fact either much closer to the walls or inside the walls. And so I didn't know if you had run across any other situations where a community made that kind of notation. That in other words, that to me, the dig itself was really very highly significant in terms of attempting to separate lore from fact, right? The hand-drawn map based on somebody's memory versus what in fact exists. And I think, kind of in an age where everybody, his opinion is as valid as somebody else's, there's something to be said for, you know what I mean? Making the point that this was properly investigated, and fascinating things were found, just not quite what some folks expected or perhaps would have wanted.
Sure. I mean, that's a good thing to address, and that could be done in a number of different ways. Publication of the report and distribution of it's one way, but another way could be to have a abbreviated marker on site, something at the town hall or at the school. And I'd be glad to, gratis, review anything that anybody wanted and share ideas on that. So.
Well, I appreciate it because I think it's, again, this has been so valuable to us as education is understanding. And, we stepped forward as a commission initially with this initiative that, try to convince our friends at St. Mark's to undertake this. Really, it was very much motivated by conscience the feeling that we wanted to do the right thing in the right way and make sure that there wasn't some, mistake made in the way of developing, on top of the bones of, all of our ancestors kind of thing. And so I'm very happy that our partners at St. Mark's, and Rob Kuklovich was my main point of contact, and I know yours as well, Greg, there. And it's been a really productive partnership, and I'm very thankful both for them and for coming forward the way they did, and the wonderful work that you did. I will say that Greg, talking over your head now, has always been throughout. We did not employ Greg, St. Mark's did, but he has been unfailingly gracious and available to me throughout the process with information. And so I thank you very, very much. And here he is tonight doing this for nothing. Hopefully a little good PR, but otherwise for free. And so we appreciate it very much.
Absolutely.
I think we will let you. Do you have anything else, or shall we let you go?
I think this has been very informative and helpful, and pleasure for me. And call me anytime, folks. Any questions I can answer.
Thank you so much, Greg. All right, off you go. Here he is. All right, so next item, and thanks to everyone's for patience. I hope that was interesting and informative to folks. Moving on quickly, I'm going to bring Judith Watson over. Promoting you now, Judith, the panelist. All right, and Judith is from the Master Plan Implementation Committee, reached out to me and asked to sort of come on and update us on what that is and what the suggested goals are for the Historical Commission. So welcome, Judith.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And I don't know if you would like me to enable screen share for you, or if you want, I can bring up the document that you'd sent over at some point. So just let me know.
So what I was thinking I would do is just give a little bit of background to the Master Plan Implementation Committee, and then just have an exchange with everyone about the recommendations that were developed with Kate primarily, and I know she's been talking with you guys as well. That the Historical Commission has responsibility for within the master plan. I did a similar session with the Recreation Commission last night, and I think we all agreed that this is really just kind of like a baselining session, and there'll be potentially future sessions where we can talk about other topics in more detail, but if that's okay. So maybe I'll just give a little bit of a background, and then perhaps we can pull up the document and talk to that. Okay, so I think, as Kate asked me, I am one of the members of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. The master plan was finally finished and by the Planning Board, which is its sponsor, in June 2022. So even though it's the 2021 master plan, we kind of crept into 2022 slightly. But so that report is available for anybody to see on the town website underneath the Master Plan Implementation Committee site. One of the major items that we agreed as a master plan committee back in the beginning of our tenure was that we felt it was really important to have a more structured approach to the implementation phase for that master plan. So I think there was general consensus that the 2008 plan was very robust. It was written primarily by a kind of outside consultant with input from all of the town boards and committees, but there were a number of goals and recommendations within that report that really never got to fruition and to completion. And there was a general sense that it was because there wasn't any sort of oversight of that implementation phase. And, you know, the recognition is that some of these recommendations are not quick to get action, that some of these will be big strategic projects that might take another, 5 to 7 years before we finally see them as complete. But it was felt, and the planning board agreed, that if we have an implementation committee that at least keeps the focus on it, and it doesn't just become a report that people put in their desk drawer and go, hey, how wonderful, and we never actually achieve anything. So the committee itself is very small. Lisa Braccio is the chair. Debbie DeMaria from the planning board is the secretary, and she will report out to the planning board on a quarterly basis how everything is going. Then there's myself, Kat McKee, and Will Warren. And what we've done is we've grouped the different boards and commissions in the town that have responsibility for goals and recommendations into kind of some key themes. And each member of the committee is responsible for liaising with those boards and commissions. So I had the pleasure of working with, it's called the Recreation Education kind of grouping. So we have Recreation, Historical Commission, and the School Committee. So I get to kind of really more deep dive into how everything's going there. So the purpose of this kind of first meeting is just to kind of level set, introduce myself to everybody, and talk a little bit about how you feel things are going with the master plan. Hopefully everyone, as I know Kate's done a fine job of keeping you in touch with how we were doing, but how everyone is feeling. So if we wanted to pull up I can share the document, Kevin, or if you.
I think I've got it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So, within the master plan itself, there's recommendations at the end of every chapter, and then a final implementation plan, which pulls everything together. And these are and then what I did was I kind of did a 180-degree rotation and pulled out the specific responsibility goals and recommendations that the Historical Commission has been assigned, just to allow us to focus on those key topics. And it's pretty straightforward because there was a whole section in the master plan about historical resources within the town. There's other sections within the plan or other boards and commissions within the town that have got recommendations all over the place. In many chapters, the select board is the obvious one because of their overall responsibility. So I don't know, is it worth just kind of going through these and kind of saying, do you have any questions or anything you're not, you feel are not appropriate anymore?
Well, I think the good news, Judith, is we actually have a number of items on the agenda tonight that I think go directly to recommendations here, which I'm very happy about, because I thought, and I did send this out to the commission beforehand, so everyone's had a chance to review it. But I was actually, when I was comparing what we were up to with what the sort of list of wants here, I must say I was feeling pretty good about it, actually. But I didn't know if there was a specific, and some of the things, so for instance, you have 1.4 about expanding school outreach in conjunction with the Southborough Historical Society to increase children's awareness of Southborough history. That's a good one, and that's one, frankly, that we don't have much cooking on at the moment. And so it's nice to have that in front of us, because it's certainly, we have sort of peripherally talked about it and some initiatives that could potentially involve the school age population in town. But it's nice to see that, in fact, in print, as a desire of the sort of larger master plan committee. Is something for us to think about and talk about, as we go forward. but would you like, I don't know if people in the commission have questions about what these recommendations are, or if Judith, there's specific points that you want to, for instance, some of these things, again, like 1, 2, the heightened awareness and appreciation of Southborough's historic resources within the town's tricentennial celebrations. That's a point that, for instance, I know there's going to be a tricentennial committee appointed sometime, I hope in the near future. And we've already made our views known, that we definitely want a seat on that and want to be an active participant in that. So a lot of these things I think are already lining up with what we want to do. I'm going to, one item in the chair's report, for instance, is the notation that the signs for the new National Register district have at last been ordered. So we're really excited about that and look forward to those being erected perhaps by early summer. So I don't know if there was a particular item in this list that you wanted to sort of call to our attention, or that was felt that was more important.
No, I mean, I think, one of the things that we talked about as a master plan committee was the fact that it's not viable to do everything at the same time. And I think that was where, topics like the cultural corridor were kind of deemed as more medium term, because they were, potentially going to take another 2 or 3 years before we get to that point. So, I mean, really, my remit is to check in with you twice a year. So, if we view this as our kind of winter check-in, unless there's something that crops up and you want me to come back and kind of visit with you, I wouldn't expect to kind of come and see you again until the summer. And I'll certainly be, keeping in touch with, watching the meeting streaming and checking in on the minutes, so that it's I can keep up to date on it. So this was really more of an opportunity to say, is there anything that you need support with, need help with? The master plan implementation committee is definitely not responsible for doing anything in the plan. Our role is very much a kind of a progress tracking and reporting out to the planning board. So if you feel everything is kind of in order and we'll be moving forward, then that's absolutely fine.
Well, I like I said, I think there are some things further on the agenda tonight that are going to go directly to some of these items. So, and would be happy, anytime you want to reach out to me or to Kate, or or come back to us, we'll be happy to give you an update about what we're up to, and hopefully some of those things you'll actually see tangibly as you drive down the street before. Does anyone in the commission have any questions for Judith? And certainly, Judith, anytime you want again an update, I mean, send me an email and I'll provide it. Like there's some particular that we're about to complete something, I can just put on my list to shoot you a message to say, oh, we've done it, or here, here's something that you can report back in terms of progress.
Okay, that would be great. Yeah.
But I appreciate the list of recommendations, and I think it helps us again achieve some kind of focus, because we do have a lot of things going on. So
yeah, for sure. Okay, awesome.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Lovely
Judith.
to meet everybody.
Thanks, Judith.
Oh, Judith, I actually just have one question.
Oh, sure, yeah.
In terms of, I guess, in line with tracking how we're doing, would it be useful to kind of, as the commission goes about our work, either fill out in this table what actions that we've taken that kind of relate to certain items on these goals, or is it more just an informal thing between the master plan implementation committee and us.
I mean, I think, you know, if you as a commission are keeping track through, whether it's through the minutes or through these meetings of specific things that have been delivered, I think that's absolutely fine. I mean, we're, you know, we don't really have the bandwidth to be kind of doing detailed reporting out on all of the different recommendations. There's, you know, there's actually 201 recommendations in the master plan. So really it's more, you know, we know that a lot of the boards and commissions now are doing a really great job of kind of more detailed planning and keeping track of deliverables. And so we're very happy to kind of, you know, rely on you guys to be doing that. We're definitely not the master plan police.
Great, thank you.
Fair enough. Anybody else? Good. All right. Thank you so much, Judith. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
coming by and
And
being
thank you
patient.
for letting me listen to the first bit. I've been listening to or watching that little triangle kind of take shape. So it's really interesting to hear some of that background as well.
Yeah, it was fascinating. But thank you so much for coming.
Okay.
We'll look
Thank
forward
you,
to seeing you
guys.
again.
Have
Okay.
a great weekend.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
All right, so now chair's report. I'm going to try to whip through this very quickly, although there's some quite substantial items here. First, as you recall, our last meeting, we were talking about a letter to write in support of the Southborough Historical Society in their efforts to renovate Fayetteville Hall. We drafted a letter, we amended it during the meeting, and we approved it. I just wanted to report back to you that I sent it out exactly as written and as amended. It was received by Michael Wyson at the Historical Society, and he was delighted with its contents and included it in the grant application package that he submitted. And let's hope for good results, maybe with a little help from his friends at the Historical Commission. Second, 42 Main Street update. This is very interesting. As you recall, the demolition delay on 42 Main, that's the Dockstone House, has now expired. And right around when that was happening, you know, there's a lot of concern about what's going to happen next, and people, you know, worst fears, they're going to show up with the bulldozers. And I was trying to, you know, reassure everybody that based on, you know, the many conversations I've had with Jim Shea, that they were not about to do that, that Fay School was not about to do that, and they haven't, and they're not going to. I will tell you that in January, Mr. Shea met with the executive board of the Fay's Board of Trustees and got positive news, and he notified me of that news that night. Later in January, he also met with Mr. Gustafson. I always mangle his name. I'm very sorry about that. Gustafson, the head of school, and also with the architect. That was a three-way meeting, again, with very positive results. The project continues on track. Mr. Shea has been otherwise occupied for the last couple of weeks, but I expect to speak with him within a matter of days again. I will tell you that about February 1st, so a couple of weeks ago, he announced his retirement, or that he's going to, this term that he is now president of Fay's Board of Trustees will end in July, I guess, with a new fiscal year. He's been the president of that board for 9 years and a trustee for 13. So it's a very significant turnover. He will be succeeded by Anne Laguerre, who's apparently currently the current vice president of their Board of Trustees. So first of all, I congratulate Jim on you know, his service. And also I'm a little sad about it because I as I've indicated many times, I love working with him so much and find him just a wonderful partner. But I have a feeling that this is going to be now a real press to get this done. and to get this sort of buttoned up and the funding in place. And I hope a formal announcement that the Dockstone House will be saved prior to his going out as the chair of their board of trustees in July. So I think it's actually in a certain way, it's a little bittersweet, but it's an encouraging note with regard to the Stone House, because again, I think that Jim is going to want to get this done. He's wanted to get it done from the beginning. And again, so things are moving along there, and I will keep you posted on developments. There was, by the way, of course, part of this came up right after our meeting. My Southborough, the blog, did sort of a story on this, and there was a lot of back and forth about, the bulldozers coming in, and I was trying to reassure everybody that no, they are not coming in. And for the record, and it's something that didn't occur to me at the time that we last met when we spoke about this, and a couple of you were asking me questions, that there is a fail-safe that just slipped my mind at the time, sort of built into this. And that is, Kate and I got trained on the OpenGov system, and it's been very helpful in working with the building commissioner's office, because there's a tracking system, and everything that's done in that file triggers a notice to me, for instance, and I see it and respond to it immediately. So I had clarity from the building commissioner that even though the demo permit has expired, there are still proactive steps that the school would have to take to actually get the permit. If they were to take those active steps, I would know about it, and I reassured the people that were asking me that I would immediately call a meeting were that the case. But Jim has reassured me, not that he needed to, but yet again, that they have no intention of doing that at this time, and everything is on track the way it has been toward a sort of successful, as far as we're both concerned, outcome for this, which will be to save the Stone House. Next, historic district signage. I already teased it, I guess, when Judith was here, but the great news is that on January 30th, the order went in to Franklin Bronze out of Annie, wherever it is, something in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, somewhere in Pennsylvania.
Somewhere in Pennsylvania. And it gives me the opportunity to say thank Annie once again for all the tremendous work she did. She's been the liaison to the vendor and had to work out one heck of a lot of details over many, many months. I was down there with a big packet of information and got really nice, very accommodating help from Vanessa Hale, our assistant town administrator. Also, we got really good help at the end, getting it over the finish line from Carla McAuliffe, the town accountant. Going back to the beginning, I feel inclined to note the lovely reception I got on multiple occasions from the ARPA committee and Andrea Hamilton as chair. From capital planning, they were total sweethearts to us, and Jason Malinowski was immensely helpful to me over several conversations, and also our friends at the select board who were supportive all the way through. So we got, so far as I'm concerned, the royal red carpet treatment from everybody along the way. And it wasn't easy. There were some complications at the end in terms of funding and billing, and we had to get it through because Franklin Bronze was about to raise their prices because of materials cost. And so they were very good about honoring a price for a number of months while we sort of worked through details, mock-ups, field testing of the signs. There were 3 of us out there holding them up and all this stuff. And finally, I did hesitate a little bit in December because I had hoped to have a conversation. The turnover at the DPW was a factor here because they have to be involved in installation. And I knew that, in December, the outgoing head of the DPW, I couldn't imagine was going to have any appetite for talking about signs that were going to be installed 6 months after she was gone, and was probably worrying about snow budgets and covering staffing and, buttoning up a lot of matters. So we held off as long as we could, but then with this price increase coming, we had to go and act. And so I look forward to, I did a lot of work to sort of pinpoint conditions at each of the locations. and document those. And I look forward to when we do get a new, I know we have an acting DPW chief, but when a new hire is made, working with that individual to make sure the details are all correct. One last thing is, as far as the money goes, the good news also is that we've got a couple $1,000 left from this at this point. And I think it's prudent to hold this in reserve, because when the new DPW head comes in, that person may say, well, you need breakaway mounts, or you need this, or you need that, associated installation costs that we're unaware of right now. So we have that money. The good news is we have that money available if that's not necessary to get them installed, because otherwise everything is included: poles, mounts, caps, bolts, the whole shooting match. I have two thoughts about that. One is that I would love if our friends in the select board would let us keep a couple grand and roll that into the historic signs program, the house signs program, because we got no money. And if not, we will happily return it and do our bit, even if it's just $2,000 or something for the town's fiscal health. Now, also, with regard to the historic house signs program, we've been a little bit stoppered because our sign maker passed away, unfortunately, due to COVID. And so Kate, I know, has been working on getting a replacement. I feel a little urgency on this. I heard about a week or two ago from someone in Karen, I hope I don't mangle her name, Mutalik, who lives on East Main, 28 East Main, I believe it is. It's a lovely, lovely Second Empire house built in 1875, a beautiful mansard roof and those lovely double front doors. And it's gorgeous. Annie, you might know the house. It's very pretty. I walk by it on occasion and just think, oh, wow, I'm a sucker for a mansard roof. And she inquired, what about the house sign program? And I had to say, unfortunately, it's on hiatus. Because we're a little strapped for cash, but more importantly, because we don't have a sign maker yet. So it put a little fire under my butt to get us, try to get some resolution. And I'm going to pass the guilt on to Kate.
That's fine. I sent so I looked back at my emails to see when I had sent an email to the gentleman who took over for Bob when he passed. And I did, end of the summer, I had emailed him, and now I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he was inundated taking over orders for Bob, who had died. And I sent him another email yesterday, and I figure that maybe we give him a week or so to respond. And then I have spoken with somebody else who I know that has had some other signs done. And I will happily start investigating if I don't hear back from Tim, who has taken over at Old Colony Designs. So
perfect. Thank you so much. Well,
Yeah.
that's good. So there's
sorry
hope.
that I don't have a solution just yet, but I was, for a variety of reasons, I'm hoping to try to stick with Old Colony. And I sent him a picture of some of the signs that he's done for us. I understand that he may not be able to honor the incredibly inexpensive price that we used to have,
Right.
and I understand that, but I'm just hoping to get. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. This is why I'm angling for the leftover.
I know, because there's no way we're going to ever get a sign company that's going to make them for $65 again.
Right.
And then ship them to me. I promise you, I am working on it, and I'm if I don't hear back from him, I'll start working on another company that I've heard from a friend who does beautiful work. And then maybe by the next meeting, we can discuss if we're just going to move forward with another sign person.
Awesome. Thank you. I think
You're
that really,
welcome.
it's a kind of a goodwill thing and really great for education in the town.
It is. I miss doing it. They just did such a beautiful job. And because this gentleman, Tim, who's taken over, has all the templates from Bob's Designs. That's why one of the reasons that I've been hopeful to stick with them. But, and I understand that he's probably had a backlog. But, if it doesn't work out, then we'll move on.
All right,
I'm on
next, 84 Main Street and meeting with conservation. Grant and I met with Melissa Danza on, I believe it was January 20th, over some issues with 84 Main, and they mostly really go to the Conservation Commission. And there's, just so you folks know, there's some, they're working out some detail about a structure on the property near the driveway off of Deerfoot. It houses a generator and it's a transformers outside, and it apparently encroaches upon a place that had a conservation restriction that was meant to protect a beech tree. And it's a big, long story. And as I understand it, Mr. Deli Priscoli and the Conservation Commission, with some input from town council and Melissa Danza, who's just a lovely person, and Michael Wyson, who is working as he wants you to know, pro bono, assisting Mr. Deli Priscoli in this matter. I think they're close to getting a resolution on that. But so Grant and I met with Melissa, and we're sort of comparing notes. And one of the issues that we have with 84 Main involves the master landscape plan and just what was documented and how it was documented. And it's been sort of a thorny issue because we don't have anything on file. And so, as it happens, Grant and I were leaving the meeting and ran into Mr. Wyson coming into the Corderville Hall and I asked him about it. And he said, well, I can give you the stuff, and dropped it off at my house later that day. So I took it down to the townhouse, and Vanessa Hale was really nice and got it scanned for us. And I sent it off to Melissa so she could see it. And she corrected the PDF, which somehow came up upside down, and sent it back to us. And the bottom line is, it seems that, record keeping in the past in this regard was not what it should be and what I want it to be for us going forward. So now that we have the scans of these maps, one of the things I'd like to put you on, Grant, is getting them uploaded on our town webpage, because I want them to be like the PR, accessible to people that can look and see what's there, what's supposed to be there, what is there. And, I think my thought was, I'd like to see, so he doesn't feel like he's getting, his leg chewed at from multiple sides, that allow Mr. Deli Priscoli to work out that small and I think solvable issue with the Conservation Commission and with Melissa Danza prior to us, speaking to him just to get an update and to ask some clarifying questions about where we're at. And so I just wanted to update you that we are making progress on this, and we do have some documents, and we do want to get them into the public record. And I think in an upcoming meeting, perhaps in March or April, certainly no later than May, I think it might be nice to talk to Mr. Deli Priscoli and get an update and see what he's been up to and how things are going over there. So anything you would add to that, Grant?
Yeah, I would just say it was a really constructive conversation that we had with Melissa. It was not a conservation restriction, but a restricted zone based
Right.
on an agreement that actually predated the preservation restriction that Concom, or it was brought to the Concom's attention. And so I'm not sure. I know that Melissa had to go to town council regarding a proposition that they had made, so I'm not sure actually if it's resolved or when it's going to be resolved, but it is at least in the works. And yeah, regarding documents, Michael did provide those plans, which are very helpful. One thing I would note is that I'm not actually sure, and Melissa had mentioned that we're not actually sure if it is the quote master landscape plan that is referenced in the document, but they are useful plans to have. And so I have a number of documents that I'll work on trying to I guess contact the IT department and have
Yeah, I
them.
think Jay or Hassan would
Mhm.
be helpful in that regard. Because
either.
I think it's going to be a process for us because, we're trying to piece together a lot of loose threads that apparently sort of developed over the years and knit together something cohesive that everybody can understand. And I think it's important for us to do that. So there's agreement, and it's going to forestall or, prevent misunderstandings in the future. So that's my ultimate goal with this stuff.
One other thing I would note is that another thing I've been trying to track down is, in addition to that plan, is meeting minutes from the time, because unfortunately a lot of the meeting minutes from the time frame in which all this kind of occurred and any approvals which might have been granted by the Historic Commission aren't on the town website. So been trying to find those to actually see kind of what's occurred and what the Historical Commission approved, what they didn't approve, and that would help understand what might be out of compliance with the PR, or if everything's in compliance. So that's something I've been working on as well.
Yeah, Grant, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm sorry, I should have credited with you. They've been sort of digging around and with the assistance of Jim Haggerty and trying to sort of piece together the documents so that we do have a kind of comprehensive record. So keep at it. And thank you. Next, 19 Main Street. This is the Peters High School Annex and the former fire station, of course, owned by St. Mark's. I got a call last week from Rob Kuklovich at St. Mark's, and it was really a courtesy call to let me know that, which is why it's on the agenda. I guess I beat the blog to it by a day or so. And they were going to send a press release to my Southborough that St. Mark's intends to demolish the Peters School Annex and the former fire station. Now, I say it's a courtesy call solely because neither building is in our purview at all. The demolition delay bylaw applies to buildings built 1925 or earlier. The Peters School Annex opened in 1930. The fire station, which is really, let's be honest, it's just a garage or a series of garages, was built in 1978. And so, as it stands, now here's the thing, right? I'll be blunt. The fire station, the 1978 fire station that faces Main Street, I don't think anybody is going to lament. It's a garage. The Peters High School Annex is a more interesting case. This is a building that is a contributing property in our National Register district, right? And, so obviously it has some merit and sensitivity. It's covered in the state MACRIS database. It's funny because a building with different features gets called different things. It's called Colonial Revival on one of the scan record cover page. And then on a subsequent page, it's called Federal Revival because it has elements of both. It is an interesting building, built, designed by a prominent architect, built in 1930. I remember when I first moved to town, I was poking around and walking up places, some of which I probably shouldn't have been, looking around at things. And I thought, well, that's an interesting building, and was rather charmed by it. But on the other hand, it is, of course, it sits kind of sideways on the property. You can't see it from the street. It's way back. It's been much altered by its use as a police station, modern doors, apparently more or less gutted on the inside. And at this point, not a particular distinction, but it's all, this is all just wind as far as we're concerned, because again, St. Mark's has every right to demolish it. And the interesting part of this conversation with Rob was, first of all, he, as I believe was covered in the blog and mentioned in their press release, that what they plan to put back there is meant to engage with the community. It won't be, as I understand it, the intention is not exclusively, in other words, something for St. Mark's, like another dorm. And I do not feel at liberty to talk much about the details of what he was suggesting is possible there, but I will say that it's very exciting. I think it could be something that would really electrify the town if they're able to follow through on this, and it will sort of engage the community and be something quite exciting. In any case, they have every right to do it, and we have no grounds to object. And personally, I my own view of it is that on the one hand, the loss of the building, it is a contributing property. It's interesting and significant. But I think this is a case where, and it's interesting, the high school building, you guys can I take one prevail upon everybody, and thanks for the patience of our audience, to show you the high school, which was built in 1900 and which occupied the space where the abandoned firehouse now is. In other words, this was the building, the Peters High School itself, not the annex, right? The Peters High School itself was built in 1900. It closed in 1959 with the opening of Algonquin and was demolished in 1962. If anybody sort of wants to, in a way, sort of lament the loss, this is the thing that we should be sad about. That's the demolished Peters High School. Unbelievable building, 16/4 windows. I mean, it's just crazy stuff. Can you see that one? That's actually an old postcard of the building. That's what was there.
Oh my God.
That I would have gone to the mat for and fought to my last breath, had I been here in 1962, when, the dummies in charge of things back then decided to get rid of that. Look at that thing. It's unbelievable. Well, my friends, that's gone. And there's nothing, and no bringing it back. And instead, the annex is back there and this crappy fire station.
Yeah.
So they have a right to take it down. They're going to take it down. They tell me that, Rob says, we're going to do something really great there. And I believe him. And I'm excited as hell about it. So now I did say to him a couple things. First of all, we would like to get in there, and he's agreed to this, to document the building photographically inside and out as extensively as possible. That's important. We need to do it, and we will do it. Secondly, I did talk to Rob. There are some elements, for instance, a very interesting cupola on top of the annex. And so I did talk to him, for instance, about, are you amenable and open to the idea of some architectural salvage effort on this building for the features that may remain? And again, it's been much altered, but some of the features that may remain, if we can find a use for them or someone willing to take them, are you amenable to that? He said yes. So that was two. And the third thing I talked to him about a little bit was the gazebo out by the street. And I said, I've heard some people say that they don't like the proportions of it and whatnot. I find it kind of pretty and attractive. And I think it could, especially with what they're talking about maybe doing over there, it would be a lovely sort of feature, perhaps maybe move back a little bit onto into that Peters Park area, a little bit away from the street, but it's a lovely thing. It was donated by a graduating, I believe, a high school class of whatever it was. I should know off the top of my head, but I've forgotten. But could that be saved? he said, yes, we are amenable to that, and actually mentioned that at one point, St. Mark's had tried to give that to the town, but no one could find a place to put it. So, it was a good conversation. I appreciate the outreach. And again, but what this sparks, and this will come up a little bit later in our agenda, if I can get to it, is that this ought to provoke among us and among people in the town a very meaningful discussion about what kind of town do we want to have. And it goes right to this need to update the demolition delay bylaw, which we'll talk about. The demolition delay bylaw desperately needs some refinement in the language, but what it principally needs is not a set date for buildings built, 1925 or before, because of course, every year that goes by, you know what I mean? The buildings that are ineligible for consideration, like the Peters School Annex, grows larger, right? What the demolition delay bylaw needs is a kind of a sliding scale. Imagine, Bob Barker's thing, you got to get the price on, and in my view, it should be 75 years. 75 years would have put any building, help me there, 1937 or older in 2022, would have put any building 1937 or older. Is my math right, Jim? Correct me. I think it's 37.
Thereabouts.
It'd be 75 years. Would have put it in our purview under, if we had it.
48, am I 1948?
Suddenly, running a meeting and doing math is not my forte. Or is it 40? Somebody in the audience is probably losing their mind right now. Okay, it's 1947.
47, yeah.
Yeah, 53 and 22 is 75. Even I can do that under pressure. So 1947. Had we a demolition delay bylaw where the cutoff was 75 years or older, we would be having a meaningful conversation about the Peters High School Annex. Might not change the result. As we all know, the demolition delay bylaw delays. It does nothing else. It gives an option for people to consider their options. But that's it. So, but we would have had a conversation about it, and we would have had some kind of say so. Again, I'm not sure my opinion would be any different than it is, but I think it also goes to the issue of historic districts, a local historic district, of course, which provides much more teeth. But at the very least, it goes to the need to update the demolition delay bylaw. But again, under the bylaw that we have no say-so in this. And so, I think from the standpoint of it is a contributing property, it's a sad loss. On the other hand, they have every right to do what they're going to do, and I wish them well. And I am very excited about the possibility of something coming in that is going to really ignite the downtown. So,
Kevin, if I may,
yeah.
So I agree. Obviously, it's outside of the permit of the demolition delay, and I'm not super familiar with the building. I've seen it, obviously, but not super familiar with the history. I've read what was in my Southborough, but I do think there are other ways, if the commission was so interested, that we can apply pressure, influence, educate. There are other powers outside of just the demolition delay. So again, I right now don't have a strong opinion on this because I am not super familiar with the building, but if we deemed it to be historically significant and even though it was technically outside of our power, I do think there are things that we could do. We could send a letter, we could, it would be limited, obviously, and we wouldn't have power to stop it necessarily. But I do think, that would be within our reach as a commission if we were so inclined. Again, I'm not necessarily advocating for that, but just thought I would say that.
No, that's fair. And what I would encourage folks to do is, this only came up again in the last few days, but, if you all want to, you can look it up, or I'll send you the macros. And, research the property, go walk over there. I don't think anyone's going to arrest you if you walk around a little bit. And, we can take it up as a point of discussion. My own feeling is that I think, especially even the location of the building, the real loss was, again, 60 years ago when the high school itself was torn down. And what you've got now are remnants of a building that, Rob describes that is so problematic, and that they did have actually people look at this with an eye toward possible, retention or restoration or, renovation. And they just found it impossible. And it's a little hard for me to argue with that, because the way it sits even on the property, it is not particularly attractive, and it's almost invisible from the street. But it's an interesting point of conversation. I'm happy to give folks time to, think about it and collect their own thoughts. And if we want to have a more fulsome discussion about it going forward, we can do so.
Kevin, I'm getting ahead of the process here, but it strikes me as something we want to think about when the time comes to propose the changes to DDBL. And I know they have to go to town meeting. If we if we make it a rolling 75 years, it'll put about another 20 years in the bucket, meaning 20 from 1946. Do we have any idea how many houses automatically become affected by that?
Well, I think that's something we'd have to research, and certainly we're going to get asked at a town meeting if we went back with a bylaw that said we want a rolling 75-year date. But one of the points that was made by the guy, I'm sorry, I forget his name at the moment, who came and spoke to us last summer about the district, the historic district, said, it's not always that. There's going to come a time when, the mid-century ranch or some, a cape or something is actually going to appear to our eyes as historic home. And there'll be some debate about whether or not, to preserve it. It's not always the federal, or the 1920s craftsman kind of thing and we have to, the idea of a rolling date, of course, is to have the demolition delay bylaw be a sort of living, breathing document that adjusts to the times. And I would say the people concerned about the Peters High School annex is that this is a reason to support a more robust DDBL, or to at least get in, or to consider possibly a historic district that would have a local historic district that has teeth, of course, because the National Register district has none. It is purely a sort of designation. And that this is the thing that both, soothes some people and alarms others.
Well, where I was going with is that when we do that analysis and we understand how many houses will be impacted, we could decide if it would be easier pill to swallow to make it a rolling 100-year, for example. And then
maybe it is 100 years, maybe it's 80, and we would also, as part of this process, need to survey other communities with, demolition delay bylaws. The state can help us with that. And because I'm sure initially that was the feeling, that 75 years was, or that, the 1925, to my thinking was, no, to disparage, whoever drafted that originally, but it was a mistake because it locks you in. The minute it's like a car, the minute it rolls off the lot, it loses half its value. Every year that goes by, the DDBL becomes less valuable to us, at least if you're concerned about 20th century properties. So,
Kevin, I just did a quick query in the public record database that I have access to through the MLS. And it says there's 111 properties in Southborough built between 1926 and 1948. So that's just directionally probably about what we'd be looking at.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, we'll work on this. I think it's, again, I don't want to mix my nuts too much here with all this stuff, but the update on Peters and acknowledging Grant's thoughts on this is that the immediate status in terms of our involvement is that we have none. So from a you know, status standpoint, I think people need to take some time to think about this and do a little research into the property. I mean, again, my own, I'm being very frank with my personal view, and my personal view is I don't think, it may sound rather shocking coming from the chair of the historical commission, but I think what we're going to get is probably going to be much better than what we're giving up. But everybody can think those thoughts on their own, and we'll come back and debate it. Happy to do so. I'm going to move on. 5 Corderville Road demolition delay update. You know, as you know, we are scheduled to have a joint meeting with the select board, the Southborough Housing Opportunity Partnership Committee, and us on the 28th, right? That's like a week from this coming Tuesday. So coming up pretty soon. And it's a very exciting development. And I just want to make some just briefest sort of comments about this, right? You know, when the application for the demo permit came in, right? We had like 10 days to meet. That was in, you know, November. We met. You have to have that initial determination whether the building is historically and or architecturally significant. If so, it triggers the call for within 45 business days, the hearing, right? So we did determine it at that meeting in November that it was historically and architecturally significant. Then it goes to the process for the hearing within 45 days. That was scheduled for January 5th. We had to move pretty quickly. It was on the 19th of December that Grant, Annie, and I took a site visit of the house that was arranged for by a realtor with Andrew Abu Realtors, who's representing, sort of brokering things between the applicant, Kendall Holmes, that applied on behalf of the heirs to Ray Hewling, who was the owner occupant of the home. And we visited the house on December 19th, right before Christmas. It was sort of 10 o'clock in the morning, and a kind of a brisk, December morn kind of thing. Made our separate observations, went our separate ways, and then came all of us together, of course, on the hearing on the 5th, at which time we determined it preferentially preserved and placed it under demolition delay for 9 months. Now, as I've said, I don't believe in delay for delay's sake. And I think the demolition delay bylaw conveys a certain responsibility in all parties, not least us, to try to think proactively about, if we're going to delay it and say it ought not be torn down, well, what could be done with it? And to think about the options. At the same time, you don't want to get too far ahead of your skis on this. And I think someone's lost everyone's still here, but just lost video. There we go. You don't want to get too far over your skis on this, because that's not productive. And I would view it as, in a sense, unfair to the applicant. So, when this particular property came up, you go to the site visit with an open mind. As we meet, we can't discuss, we can't deliberate. It's just a site visit. That's why you don't have to post an agenda. You show up, you look around, you make, idle chit chat about the weather, or how's everybody doing kind of thing. And then you go home and think about it yourself, and we come together and have the meeting. But, I feel obliged to have some sense, if this, then that, or, what the possibilities are. So, for instance, when this came up, as you know, Grant and Annie know, and I don't recall if it came up during the hearing or not, but also in attendance during that walkthrough was the chair of the select board. And I invited Ms. Cook for one reason and one reason only, and that was the location of that property is very, very important in my mind in terms of the civic fabric of the downtown. It is, you know, 2 doors down in one direction from a town-owned property at 1 Corderville Road. That's an affordable housing unit. And it's 2 doors the other way from the Corderville Hall, town-owned building. It's across the street from Choate Field and Woodward School. When you stand on the front steps of that property, you're looking straight up the driveway of Woodward. It is kitty corner across the street from the community house. It's a chip shot, maybe a pitching wedge to the library and the town green and the townhouse. In other words, it's a very sensitive area, in my mind, to the life of the town. And so without, you know, very much specific thinking beyond that, it seemed to me that it was prudent to invite the select board chair as a guest, if she was available, to view the house, because I wanted it to be on their radar if, you know, we were to make a determination as a full board or commission that the house should be saved. You have to think about what the options are. And one of the options is in some way involving the town. So as it happened, Ms. Cook was available and very kindly showed up on a cold December morning, probably had better things to do, but came down and walked through with the 3 of us, took a look, and we all went our separate ways. After we, you know, determined the house preferentially preserved on January 5th, then, as again, I feel an obligation to try to find a proactive solution to the question of why is it delayed? Can anything be done? And that leads us to this joint meeting that, you know, I initially polled you. It was proposed for an earlier date this month. And my understanding is that Shopsy couldn't make it. But I presume now that they can, and that'll be on the 28th. So the 3 of us will sit down together and hopefully have a frank, good-humored conversation about what the possibilities might be. And that's where we're at. So I just wanted to sort of bring you up to speed on what that is. Not much has been, you know, on our side determined beyond that, because you have to see what, you know, everybody's buy-in is, what's available. We don't control affordable housing funds in town. That's the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee, which FYI is 5 members of the select board. Dorianne Jasinski is the chair of Shopsy, and I believe Mr. Boland, Bill Boland. Those are the 7 people who, you know, control funds. Shopsy has a major, obviously, a major role in this. So we'll see what everybody thinks. I mean, I think that's the bottom line. I have been in touch with Ms. Hewling, who is the, Sandra Hewling is the heir to her, or is it, you know, trustee of her brother's estate. And she lives in California. We've spoken by phone. We had a long conversation a couple of weeks ago. She's a lovely person to talk with. And I think we have you know, we're in this early preliminary stage of trying to figure out what's possible and what's not. And so I'm glad that I know we have a quorum available for that meeting on Tuesday. I think it's going to be a very important one and a very interesting one. That's about all I really want to say about it right now. Again, with the idea of respect for everybody's agency that's involved here, Shopsy and the select board and our own, and trying to not get too ahead of the game, but just know that it's coming up and we'll have a good conversation and we'll see what can be done. Fair enough? Excellent. This is next item, discuss St. Mark Street Park Working Group activity. Well, it's been a busy group. We've had several meetings between our last meeting and this one. And I think, in my view, we're getting pretty close to a design. Now, a couple of things I wanted to mention here, and Grant, chime in when I'm going off script too much or something. In the last meeting I presented, Michael Wison from the Historical Society came to me, or sent to me and to Marguerite Landry, who's the chair of the working group, two things. One was a plan that the society has been officially working on involving a history walk in downtown that would go all the way from 1 Sears Road, up Main, past the townhouse, past the town green, up around through by the flag school, through the new proposed park, back to Main Street, basically up to the railroad tracks. It's basically the confines, although expanded to the west, of the new National Register District. Back around, down Lattisquama ways and back up, back on Main Street. And he has it going down Middle Road. I've already urged Michael to change that so you go down Corderville through the rural cemetery and back up Middle Road, maybe ducking back on Main Street, and then continuing back on Main Street all the way down to the Burnett Mansion. It's basically a giant loop. And they've done a lot of work, apparently, some of it with grant money provided by St. Mark's, timely enough, to sort of chart out the history, and it's based on the Macris research in large measure, of all the historic properties in that sort of walk. And I'm going to make an argument to Michael to expand it down on East Main, because there are some lovely houses down there as well, and try to be a little more expansive. But he sent that in conjunction with his own proposed plan for the park, which I agreed to present in the spirit of not representing either the Historical Society, because it wasn't their official work product, nor the Historical Commission, because we hadn't even talked about it, but just as, here's another idea, let's get all the ideas on the table and see what we can take and maybe cobble together and come up with, not a Frankenstein park, but something actually really interesting and coherent and cohesive. And then there were elements of Michael's design that I like very much. Among them, 4 different landings that would allow you to tell different aspects of the story. This is why I was asking Greg earlier tonight about possibly a marker for the archaeological dig itself that would explain what was done here, what was found and what wasn't found, and why, and so on. So I wanted you guys to know, A, that Grant already knew, but that, I had presented this idea. I believe I have it. If you just, I'll give you the briefest, quickest look. Okay, if you hang on, that's not it. This is where it gets tricky to do this by yourself. Okay, that's the Historical Society's history walk. I know it's difficult to see, probably as difficult as home as it is for me. That's the Sears Road where my cursor is, running along Main, up around, that's the existing Historical Society. This is the proposed area of the new park, back down to the railroad tracks, Morrow's Cafe and so on, Lattisquama, back to, this is Corderville Road. I would have them go down here and through the cemetery and out the back of the new way, and back up Middle, and back down to the Burnett Mansion. Then the plan, if I get this right, that's the plan that I presented, designed by Michael Wison. And it's somewhat outside, there are elements of this outside the purview of the working group, because he's kind of drawn up an amphitheater proposal. This is on the grounds of the flag school that he had originally worked on. But the reason it's appealing is because it kind of helps cohere all this stuff together, that you would come down this walk, you'd have the amphitheater here, then you'd enter the park, walk down the path, and now you're heading toward the library. And of course, this is the area that Greg Waller all investigated. The upshot of the last meeting, Grant, this is where I need your help, is there were elements of Mr. Wyson's plan they liked. There are elements of a plan that Freddie Gillespie had put forward that I think had some very strong qualities. And there's also a plan put forward by Sally Waters and Patty Burns Fiore that also was very appealing to the group. And so I think what we ended up at the end of that meeting was a kind of blend of elements of all of those things that will be sent back to VHB to see how they can sort of make it work. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think we kind of agreed on some kind of like what we did last August or July when we first got those plans, that we kind of agreed on the broad elements that we would like to see with some variations in the park. One of the variations was kind of that schematic that you showed there about whether or not there should be like segmented landings every kind of, rather than one large like patio area, whether or not there should be kind of smaller 3 or 4 of them, maybe kind of spread throughout the pathway. And so Marguerite, we kind of came to a loose agreement, and then Marguerite emailed that over to VHB. I think where we had left it last in our report to you was that the select board had authorized $20,000 to be spent by the working group on that, on actually getting fully engineered plans, I think. But so the working group tacitly agreed that they wouldn't spend that money, and VHB essentially agreed to do the concept plan for pro bono, not pro bono, but for no additional cost. So no additional funds are being spent to get this kind of updated concept plan that was requested.
And of course, it'll be up to the voters at town meeting to decide ultimately what they want. But I think we are. I'm happy to say that I felt like there was a certain kind of breakthrough at the end, and we'll see what VHB does. So I just wanted you guys to be informed of what we're up to over there in your name, because there was some question at one point as whether I was speaking officially on behalf of historical, and I said no, decidedly not, because we hadn't met at that point. And I've rest assured that I've tried to be clear about the distinction of when I'm speaking my own thoughts and when I'm speaking officially on your behalf. The next item I had summary reports on the Massachusetts Preservation Projects Fund webinar of January 18th. That was attended by Annie, and on January 31st, a meeting of the Eastern Massachusetts Historical Commission Coalition. That's a mouthful, that Grant attended. And I'm so delighted that Grant and Annie, reverse respectively, attended those meetings, because I intended to attend both and attended, in fact, neither, because on both occasions I got whipsawed by stuff that came up unexpectedly at work. And so I didn't make either. And both of those meetings were recorded. Mm-hmm. And both of those videos are available. And I intend personally to go back and watch both, because I'm interested. I know, Annie, I think you said the one you attended was deadly dull.
Yes. Yeah, it was pretty dry. So the Preservation Projects Fund webinar that I tuned into, it was very tactical. So it was literally like, if you want to apply for this funding, here are the exact specific steps that you need to follow. So, and, there were some helpful hints and, really just good instructions. So I felt like it wasn't immediately relevant to, my work or, our work as a commission. But if we did have something we wanted to apply for funding for, they really lay it all out exactly what we would need to do. And as Kevin said, the recording, they did say they would be putting the recording up on the website. So it'll be a great resource, if and when that becomes more, more applicable to our work.
Grant, what about on your end? Anything?
Yeah, I must say mine was very exciting. So sorry, Annie, that I got the more exciting of the two. But yeah, so it was the inaugural meeting of the, I'm not going to attempt to say, Eastern Massachusetts Historical Commission Coalition, I guess, right? Yeah, it was I think it was 4 presentations and then kind of a loose Q&A after. It was well attended. I think they said that there were over 350 people on the call, mostly historical commissioners from around the state. And yeah, so it began with a presentation by, I believe her name is Jennifer Doherty, who actually sent us the invitation. She is at Mass Historical Commission and she's the local programs coordinator there. So she was kind of giving a broad overview of what Mass Historical is, what its role is, and then kind of getting into some of the details about the various grant programs that they have, what each of them does, and what type of projects might qualify for those kind of state grants. So that I found that interesting. And then the second, so I should say it was a part were some were from the state, and then others were kind of other organizations, nonprofits, et cetera, in the historical preservation space. So one of them was Preservation Massachusetts, which I think is a leading historical preservation organization. Again, gave a lot of useful info and resources, and they linked a lot of them. So I was checking out a good amount of them. Also talked about grant opportunities that they have. I think there are grants for like maintenance work on like small scale kind of not like exciting new preservation restrictions or anything like that, but really kind of maintaining old buildings and stuff like that is what they give their grants out for. So that was interesting. And then there were 2 presenters from the Emmett Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, which is a regional planning agency. And they were talking about how, historical preservation fits into kind of long-term planning goals and for growth, and that preserving historical buildings is a part of, the long-term vision for kind of the Metro West Boston community. And also they talked about grant programs that they offer and technical assistance and all sorts of other stuff like that. So lots of grants that seemed interesting to me anyway. Yeah, a lot of information that I didn't know earlier. So I'm glad I attended.
Yeah, from what I had heard from both of you, I think the takeaway in a certain sense is that, and it's a little bit daunting, frankly, to me, because I think the takeaway is that there's money out there and various grants, and we have to get smart about figuring out how to get them. I have no experience in grant writing, unfortunately, and I think that's something that I don't know. There may be a time when we can get some assistance from town, paid staff in that regard. That I think that would be nice for us. But it's certainly it prompts me to want to try to get a little bit smarter, about this as we all go forward. Maybe we can all do it, and get because I think there are some initiatives that if we had the funds, and of course, ultimately money is power in this whole game, and we have none, no money. So it would be nice to have, to be able to bring home some funds that would allow us to do some things. So Jim and Kate, I mean, maybe, I'm definitely going to watch the tape, even Annie's boring one, but definitely Grant's more interesting one, and see if, there's something that comes out of that. So we'll make sure that we get those links shared. But thank you both of you.
One other thing, actually, Kevin, I forgot to mention, the woman who gave the presentation from Mass Historical is the local programs coordinator for MHC. And so it's essentially her job is to liaise with towns on their historical projects. And she talked about, helping them with demolition delay bylaws and other things like that. So it seems like a good resource to start out with.
Yeah, and that may be something we go back to as we try to put together this group to work on the language of the DDBL. So fantastic. Next I have on here, and most of this I want to table, discuss Community Preservation Committee. I don't think we're there for that, ready for that yet. And pilot committee representation. The pilot committee, this is something that passed at last town meeting. And I'm going to read you this charge really quick. It is the Southborough Pilot Committee. Charge is to research and examine how other towns of Massachusetts approach their local large nonprofit entities in regard to financial support from those nonprofit entities to pay for the taxpayer-funded town services they use, and examine any formal or informal agreements such towns may have. Second bullet point, compare the funding received from nonprofits throughout the state of Massachusetts to their local communities with the funding received from nonprofits within Southborough, so some sort of comparative exercise. Examine state code regarding requirements for and benefits of nonprofit status within Massachusetts. And then the rest of so it's a sort of, I would characterize it as a kind of think tank on the subject of pilot payments formalized into a committee. And then it calls for this committee to be composed of 7 members as follows: 3 representing taxpayers of Southborough without any financial relationship to St. Mark's, Fay School, or the New England Center for Children; 1 member of the Historical Commission, selected by the Historical Commission; 1 member of Capital Planning, selected by SAME; 1 member of the Select Board, selected by the Select Board; and 1 member from the Council on Aging, selected by the Council on Aging. So it's a 7-member board, basically 3 ad hoc, at large, I should say, members, and then Historical, Capital Planning, Select Board, Council on Aging. So you see where we come in on this. We got to get somebody to take this on. Now, I initially, when I got the email from Kate, who did that come from? Melanie Atsuka, I think, in the townhouse.
Sorry, I was on mute. I think it came from Katie Berry.
Oh, okay. It was a matter of some urgency because we had to act like immediately, and then this was well before we were scheduled to meet. And Kate and I discussed that we could do that without OML violation, and just, what are we going to do? We know we got some people who are busy, thinking about going, to another committee or have a conflict or whatever. So, who could possibly do this? Before we were really forced to try to think, figure out what to do, Chair and Vice Chair, on this, I got the word that the kind of urgency had come down a little bit because they hadn't, not enough, the at-large members there weren't enough applicants that had come forward for this thing yet. So I think the pacing of it has slowed down. And I don't even think, as I understand it, maybe someone, I know Kathy Cook is actually with us in the attendees, who wants to correct me on this, but I don't think that we need to act on this tonight. But now that it's out there, and we do have to come to a decision. I certainly, want us to send a representative. We're asked to do so. We will do it. But I think at this point we can take it under advisement because I do want to punt the Community Preservation Committee thing. Also, there are a couple other factors that play into this. We also have coming up, I certainly hope, the tricentennial or tercentennial committee assignment that we're going to need to make. I know Kate has expressed an interest specifically in that. So it may be as we divvy this up, and I know Annie's interested in sort of pulling back from CPC. You've got a lot of commitments, young child at home, all that stuff. So we're gonna have to work this out. I see a path forward for it, but we're gonna have tercentennial coming up. We've got pilot committee, we've got CPC. I will say also that we have an application in for a new member, and she's actually with us in the attendees. That would be Michelle Hokinson. I'm very excited about that. I feel like I can mention, because it's part of this discussion of committee assignments and stuff, that I hope the select board is going to act on that at their meeting on the 28th, when we'll be there actually, because this is a really wonderful applicant, a wonderfully impressive resume. And also, I think a 30-year resident of Southborough, lives in a historic house, 10 Main, used to be the town post office for a time. Very committed to historical matters. I think you all would recall Ray Hokinson. Her husband was, works with the community house, and he gave a presentation to us. So they're, as a family, they're quite committed to matters historical. And so I think the addition of Michelle would be an immense benefit to us, an immense asset, and helps us sort of fill out this sort of person power need that we have, because we are going to get, we do have a lot of commitments and obligations sort of facing us. I also understand Kate forwarded me an email. There's another inquiry about the historical commission, so we may actually get up the full complement sometime in the future. So with that in mind, unless I hear otherwise, that there's an urgent need to appoint a pilot or to recommend a pilot person, I would suggest that we sort of just table all this and everybody take it under advisement and think about where you're at. And we'll come in, and I think it's also healthy to think of this stuff, because we talked about, for instance, the tercentennial committee is going to be a multi-year commitment, and it may be advisable for us to rotate that seat, because I think that's actually good, that we'd have it all have a chance to take, spend a year in tercentennial, or maybe, I take the first year of pilot and then pass it on to somebody else, and that kind of thing. I think it would all be good for our, not exactly for our CVs, but resumes, but still good for us mentally to kind of get out and see what's going on in other boards and committees, and not lock somebody in, for years at a time at a single commitment. So let's do that. Move on. Form working group to review language of the demolition delay bylaw. You see why I put this on, right? It's important. The Peters School Annex business focused my attention on the need for us to sort of, and again, I will be transparent with everybody, including in the gallery, that my sort of overarching thinking about this is that, not to jinx things, but a successful outcome with the Stone House, and coupled with what's going on, with the Peters School, and people will feel differently about it, and possibly a good outcome with 5 Corderville, or at least the healthy exploration of that, is going to give fuel to the idea that the demolition delay bylaw actually means something, and that it's actually a very productive and useful tool that you can just say to people in a very good-hearted, good-spirited way, not trying to obstruct anybody's life, but in the larger interest of the community, let's stop, let's pause, let's look at it, and let's figure out if something can be done. You know, in the case of the Stone House, I think we're very close to a resolution that's going to really excite a lot of people and be a very happy one, you know. And I think if we can get a couple of those to fall our way, that would be the time to be fully prepared to go back to town meeting and say, look, it works, you know. So I would like to get, and I'm volunteering myself for this, and I think maybe if perhaps two, then we don't have a quorum issue. Like if two other people would want to be involved in vetting the language.
I'm very interested in this topic.
Great.
And I would be happy to work with you and anyone else on that, Kevin.
I am as well, but I'm open to hear if others are.
I was gonna offer it up, but Grant, go for it.
That's unanimous. I was going to offer any help. If you want just some eyes at looking at language after you've put it together,
Yeah.
it could be a review.
Yeah, and maybe we'll get some, I think maybe we'll just get, it's great that you're all eager for that. I'm really happy to hear it. I mean, I don't mind taking the lead and sort of, that's what I write, that's what I do. So I can work on it and then move it around. We have to be careful. I want to get maybe a ruling from Jim Haggerty about what would be in, is that serial deliberation if you move a document? You know what I mean? Like we have to, I'll be careful about that and I'll get a clarification from the clerk's office, but we'll definitely, you know, try. And obviously, you know, once we have a working draft, we'll all be together, you know, red penciling the thing and making alterations. So, but thank you for your eagerness. Let me get a clarification from, you know what I mean? How we can, without open meeting law violation, move that around. And I'll get back to you on this. Getting close, friends, getting close. Approved meeting minutes of January 5th, 2023. They are stellar, as always, by our able recording. That seems very unfair that to call our vice chair also recording secretary, because it's
okay.
so far beyond that kind
You
of.
say such nice things about me that, you know, it really makes it all worth it.
I am eternally grateful. So
We
I'm
are-
genuinely happy to do it.
They
And
really
I'm-
are so fabulous, Kate.
Oh, you guys are so nice. I'm gonna record this so my well, it is being recorded, so my teenagers can hear you say nice things about me.
All right, anybody have any corrections?
I made Kevin's and I made Jim's. That was it. That's all I got, right? Yes.
I have a couple, and sorry I didn't get them to you
That's okay. That's okay.
earlier, Kate. Let me just pull them up here.
All right. Would you mind telling me the lines that they're on?
Sure. Yep. The first one is it's so line 34, the foundation is rubble. I know, you know, what we're going for there in terms of it's made of rubble, but
Yeah.
the first time I read it, it read to me like the foundation is in ruins, kind of.
Oh, I got you. Yeah.
So I just suggested maybe the foundation is made of rubble instead,
Yep.
that make
Comprised
sense?
of, yeah, sure.
or something like that. Just
Yeah.
like, otherwise it means the, you know, it's in disrepair.
I got you. Yep. Okay. What else?
And then line 74.
Yep.
Mr. Farrington asked if Mr. Miller was aware of a timeline for a concrete decision to be, I think that's supposed to be made by.
Oh,
Facebook.
yep. Yep. Oh, that's the one that I fixed that Jim made, but apparently
Oh,
not.
sorry.
No, you're good. You both found it. So good.
And then the only other one was, and Kevin, I think you know this more than I do, but line 70, Face School signed a contract with, was it a historic architect or a historic preservation architect, or was there a specific type of architect that they specialized in, or should we just architect?
I think simply architect is fine, because you know that individual does have an extensive background, and for instance, he serves, I believe, on a historic commission in Malden or something, and you know, but I don't think specifically hangs out his shingle as you know what I mean, his
Okay.
only historic buildings. Some of the work I've seen, it's immensely impressive. Actually, it's new construction.
Okay.
But does have background and expertise in it, in historic preservation as well. So
Gotcha. Thanks for
no.
the clarification. So that's it for me.
Okay, awesome. I made them.
Anybody
If those changes are incorporated, no one else has any other changes, I move to accept the minutes now as amended.
Awesome.
Second.
Okay, roll call vote. Annie Pfaff,
Yes.
Grant Farrington,
Yes.
Jim Blaschke,
Yes.
Kate Battles,
Yes.
Kevin Miller is aye. Thank you. And can we take a moment to applaud Annie, who's recovering from COVID and is now 2 hours and 17 minutes into this
Girl.
meeting, and you look utterly in the pink. I mean, you look like fresh, happy. I know you're going to collapse.
It's probably the fever and just running on adrenaline.
Well, you're doing good. You're doing good, and I appreciate it. Now we also need to schedule a March meeting. And let's see, I'm calling up a calendar here. My apologies not having this ready. Okay. In March. Today, what about, did people have an objection to Wednesday?
Sometimes it overlaps with the society.
But
First come, first serve. Grab it.
what about Wednesday, March 15th?
When advisory meets on Wednesdays, it's just hard for my family, but I don't know what their meeting schedule.
They have a meeting. I
don't know. I don't think they've booked that far out, but I know as we get closer to town meeting, they
Well, we can stick to how about Thursday, March 16th. That would be 4 weeks.
So I have a CPC meeting that night. And Andrew just texted me, advisory is not meeting on the 15th. He's actually going to be out of the country for work. So I could meet the 15th.
How is the 15th for everybody? Okay.
Works for me.
That works for me.
Great. Jim, you're the last holdout.
I said yes. I just didn't nod my head with the verbal.
Great. Wow, that's exciting. Thank you. That's a little easier for me because I don't teach in person on Wednesdays this term. All right, Wednesday, March 15th at 7 p.m. it is. Don't forget this meeting with the select board. It's big for us.
Could you confirm the date for that actually, Kevin?
The
28th.
28th.
And at
Okay.
6:30, is that when we're gonna go at 6:30?
Yeah, I haven't seen the agenda. I can ask Kathy if, I don't know if they'll put us early on. I hope so.
Here's hoping.
Their meetings are worse than ours, as you well know.
Yeah.
So Kevin, I do have a CPC meeting that evening, but I'm telling them that I'm going to the historical one. But just in case you see that on a calendar somewhere,
Okay.
don't worry, I'm committed to historical that evening.
Thank you. Any other business? I get 2 quick items. Well, actually now just one, because I did mention our applicant to join us, which is very exciting. The other thing I had for you was, don't forget to do your conflict of interest training by March 1st. You all got that hectoring email, and I think did you get the follow-up too? Like I got a double dose of.
Listen, we're just trying to be thorough in the clerk's office.
Is that
Are
it?
you judging the clerk's office?
No.
Because,
I'm going to be but I thought to myself, I'm going to be a good boy and do it tomorrow because.
it is exactly an hour. You cannot fast forward like the old one. I'm sorry
Okay.
to say.
All right, well,
I saw
It
Amy
is a
Berry
solid hour.
today.
It's actually a little bit better than the old one.
I saw Amy Berry today at the townhouse and sincerely apologize for not getting it in yet.
Mine's done.
right, well, we got 2 weeks, so Jim, did you do it yet?
I do work there.
Working on it.
I'm working on it. All right, good. So we're gonna be,
Yeah.
I'm not the
haven't
only
even
slacker.
thought about it. I'm sorry.
All right, well, that's why I'm here to nag you, your chair. You know, all right, so public comment, I see one hand raised. This is Mr. Perry. I will bring him over, allow him to talk. David Perry, welcome and good evening.
Mute. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yes, just wanted to say, I wonder if I could, if it's relevant, I could come to one of your meetings. There's a possibility I might be purchasing a property with some very old buildings on it. They're on Route 9, just as you go up the hill towards Walgreens. On the right, there's a very old red barn and a old farmhouse. I think they might be the oldest existing farmstead between Worcester and Boston. I'm not quite sure about that, but I have a feeling that it might be. Anyway, I'm negotiating with the man who owns it. It's a bit difficult time, but he wants to tear them down. I'd rather save them and also maybe provide an open space network. So there's a wetland in the back going down Woodland Road. Was a possibility of getting a connection between the Breakneck Hill, a former orchard trails, down and then across Woodland Road, and then across the wetland and up through SVT, Sudbury Valley Trustees property, which is in back of Oak Hill Road. So that would create quite an interesting network, possibly. Those are the two objectives I have. Anyway, so I just wondered if it's pertinent to come to you to sort of, well, the reason I bring up this is because I've applied for a rezoning of the property at town meeting, which is coming up soon. It's not viable under the existing zoning. It's simply not viable. I can't get bank financing at all. So the only way to do it is to change the district from business village to business highway. And this property is on the highway, you know, so it's right next to other properties on Route 9 are zoned business highway, but for some reason this property is zoned business village, which is not really applicable because they're huge lots. They're like 14 acres as compared to like a quarter, half acre. So anyway, that's why I have this thing coming up at town meeting. I'm going to need some support really, otherwise it's difficult getting through individual parcels rezoned town meeting, obviously.
David, I'm looking to the side because I'm looking at my other monitor trying to, I believe I see the building that you're talking about. Is that 84?
Yeah, yes, 84 and 88.
Yeah, I see it.
Yes, it's a very fine old barn. I just stumbled into it anecdotally. I needed some chairs reupholstered before Christmas, and we looked online and we found an upholsterer in Southborough. I said, I don't think there's such a thing. Anyway, we set off by car. You know, we went up Central. I don't think there's anywhere. I don't know any upholsterer around here. And we went down Route 9 and went to do a sharp U-turn up the hill. I said, my God, it must be in this old barn. So we turned sharp right at 84 and came up to this massive old barn behind the house. And sure enough, there's a couple of Brazilians there who don't speak English doing upholstery. It's a wonderful old barn. It's not that old, and it's not like 1700s, but it's, you know, it's the last century. And it's very, very fine inside. So immediately struck me, wow, this is worth saving. So I contacted the owner and he says he wants to tear it down. So anyway, there's not a very good start to a conversation about buying a property. Anyway, I don't know if I'll get hold of it, but I'm trying to.
Well, yeah, I certainly thank you for bringing it up, and I'm actually trying to look it up now. The Damon, it's W. Damon House, 84 Turnpike Road, built in 1890, and it's certainly, I mean, it's you know, right up our alley. So if you would, you know, be so kind as send to my town emails, you know, what you care to share or willing to share about it. I'd love to have a look at it. And I will certainly read them. It's in the Macris database, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And so
well, I'm not actually. I don't really have much time to do this sort of level of research on the history of the place, but you know, I mean, I've been in it. It's a very fine old barn. You know, I'm really looking for help from you.
Well, I will send you the, it looks like the information on that property is limited, but I will send you what I can find.
Okay. So is there a chance I might come to your next meeting about it or not?
Well, certainly. I mean, we've been all virtual, and I don't know
Yeah.
if we immediate plans to meet in person, but you certainly, we can certainly talk to you and quite possibly put you on the agenda.
Yeah.
by Zoom.
Out of interest, could I ask, well, why are you still having meetings virtually rather than actually together?
I think it's a matter of people's, frankly, because we can. And I think it's a matter of convenience, although certainly one of the, for me, David, delimiting things with this is that I don't find that the OWL works all that well yet. And I've been waiting, frankly, for them to get the kinks fully worked out on it, because I do think that the electronic access is important for people who aren't available.
Yeah.
In person, but I would like, I mean, I like my commission quite a bit. I like them in toto and as individuals, and would like to see a little bit more of them in person.
Yeah.
So I think that's on the horizon.
Okay. Well, when is your next meeting? Could I ask her?
It'll be March 15th at 7
Okay.
p.m.
Oh, good. Okay. So I'll plan on coming. Okay.
Yes, very
Okay,
good.
great.
Thank you, David.
Thanks
Okay,
so
thanks.
much.
Bye.
All right. So anybody else in the public got something they want to say? Nope. All right. That's going to do it. I know it was a long one, but I thought that was really interesting tonight. Greg Waller was lights out.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Such an, I'm telling you, and that
What a
report,
cool guy.
I wish people would just sit down and read the gosh darn thing, because
It's neat. Yeah.
I mean, you just, again, you think experts matter.
Yeah.
Somebody who actually knows what they're talking about and can back it up. It matters, the way he explains the levels of dirt. You think to yourself, and one last thing before we go is I'll tell you that he's a real resource. And if we have something like this again, I won't share it, but I was told what that dig cost, and I was shocked at how little it was, because it would have been worth it at 10 times the price.
Yeah, he
Not-
was
not-
fantastic. Very impressive.
Not just because of what it cleared and its publicity issues, but because of what it taught us, like it really, that's going to be something that people are going to look at. You want to talk about outreach to schools. I would like to take that report. I think St. Mark should use it. I think Fay would be fascinated by it. I think there's got to be some science classes at Algonquin, where you could really turn some young people on to, like, it almost, I was reading that report the other night and I'm thinking, oh my God, I reconsider my life choices, like I want to go out and start. I wanted to hire him to dig up my own.
Dig in your backyard.
Because I'm sure there's crap back there. But anyway, all right, let's go. Thank you so much, Annie. You're a trooper for hanging in there. And I will look forward to seeing you all at the select board
On February 28th. Be there, be square.
It's going to be a real thrill. I mean, we're going to be there for good reasons, not bad ones, which is always.
Which is very refreshing. Yes.
All right, everybody. Have a good night and thank you so much.
All right. I make a motion to adjourn.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, but it's okay. That's why I'm here.
That's why you get paid the big bucks.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I make a motion to adjourn at 9:30 p.m.
Okay, geniuses. Someone's got to second it.
Is Jim on mute? That's Jim's job. Come on, Jim, you're highlighted.
I seconded it, but nobody heard me. Second.
You're on mute.
Nobody wants to leave. We just
All right. Roll call
having
vote.
so much
Andy,
fun.
Yes.
Grant.
Reluctantly, yes.
All right, Jim.
Yes.
Go off.
Kate.
Yes.
Miller. Aye. Good night, friends.
Good night, all. Have a great one. Annie, feel better.
Thank
Feel
you.
better.
I am.
All right. Cheers.
Kate. Good night.
Good night.